Hello, everyone, and good morning. While we are still waiting for some people to join us, I'm going to go ahead and start introducing ourselves. My name is Carmen Pang, and I am with the Public Outreach and Engagement Committee of the Jane Goodall Institute, Singapore. And I want to welcome you to the first JGIS ConservAction Lecture of 2022. And we're launching this year's series today, especially to celebrate Dr. Jane Goodall's birthday. She is turning 88 today. Yay! So from all of us here in Singapore, happy birthday, Dr. Jane. Excuse me. So those of you who are regulars at our lectures might recall that our previous series are themed geographically with a focus on primates around the world. This year, we're trying something new. Our theme is Tales from Eko Eko, which is a photography project jointly presented by Jane Goodall Institute and Roots and Shoots chapters across Asia Pacific. And throughout the year, we'll be pairing photographers from the project with biodiversity experts to talk about a specific flora or fauna. So to kick things off today, we'll be deep diving into marine biodiversity in Singapore. But before we get to the presentations, I would need to take care of a few housekeeping items. First, please mute your microphones and turn off your cameras during the presentation to minimize distraction and conserve bandwidth. Secondly, please note that this webinar will be recorded and the recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, where you'll also find recordings of our past lectures and many other videos, including our very popular storytelling sessions. And lastly, please use the chat box to ask your questions, and we'll get to them in the Q&A segment after both presentations. Okay, now that we've taken care of the housekeeping items, I'm going to bring in Dr. Andy Yang, President of JGIS. Andy will be telling us about JGIS and what we do. Andy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Carmen. And I like that we are going to be deep diving into underwater photography and marine biodiversity in just a bit. It's not moving. Okay, so I'd like to share more about what we do at the Jane Goodall Institute in Singapore before we go into the lectures. So our institute was set up in 2007 with the vision where people live in harmony with nature and wildlife. And we do that by inspiring, educating, and activating individuals to do their part for animals, people, and the environment. We have three main pillars in Roots and Shoots: wildlife and environment, and also public outreach and engagement, where we would roll out programs and activities to engage with people in the community and also different agencies. So with the Roots and Shoots, we work with the students and teachers to build a capacity in students in order to come up with initiatives and projects that deal with the protection and of the animals, environment, and also community. We also hold workshops where we share more about things that the students do across the different schools so that they can also look into collaborating. At the end of each year, we would be holding awards ceremony where we will recognize projects that have been working for the past year in order to look at the three different areas in the Jane Goodall Institute. We also have the Plant for Hope campaign, where students will be planting trees to restore habitats in Singapore. We also have the Wildlife and Environment Committee, where we focus a lot on living in harmony with our wild neighbors, such as the long-tailed macaques. In it, we have monkey walks and monkey guards program, and also the citizen science initiatives, where the volunteers would be trained to collect information on our fauna and flora. Also, we have the no feeding campaign, where we encourage people not to feed animals like the macaques so that we can deter animals from entering urban areas and going back into the forest. So for the Public Outreach and Engagement Committee, we share information on our biodiversity, the threats that they face, and how each of us can contribute. So we have the lecture series, the storytelling session, ConservAction activities, and also wildlife ambassadors. So today's event is under the lecture series. It was started by Dr. Jane in 2017 when she was in Singapore to share about living in harmony with nature and wildlife, and it was held at MediaCorp. So after that, we invited speakers from around Southeast Asia to share more about the work that they do with primates and also conservation, working with the local community. So we started from Malaysia, going to Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and also Cambodia. We also had a speaker from Laos, and we were sharing about the natural heritage in Singapore as well. Following that, 2 years later, Dr. Jane was in Singapore again, and this time was at NUS, and we have the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Heng Swee Keat, as our guest of honor. Afterwards, we went all the way to Africa to share about the work that Dr. Jane's colleagues and friends were doing for the conservation of chimpanzees, the rescue and rehabilitation of these species, and also the long-term study on baboons in Gobi. Then we move on to Central South America, where we were looking at the conservation activities around spider monkeys, woolly monkeys, and the capuchin monkeys. And last year, Dr. Jane was with us again, though digitally, sharing about living in harmony with wildlife, the impact of COVID on human health and also planet's health, the hopes for the future, and also with Minister Desmond Lee talking about our aspirations to become a city in nature. And this time, like Carmen was sharing, we are participating in this collaboration with the different institutes of Jane Goodall and also Roots and Shoots chapters across Asia Pacific on this campaign called Eko Eko, which is to showcase the unique biodiversity around this region through photography to inspire action to protect our biodiversity. So if interested to look at the different photos that were showcased in this website, such as by Katherine as well, please go on to Eko Eko website. And so today's lecture will be on marine biodiversity and underwater photography in Singapore. Before I hand it over to Carmen, if you'd like to support our volunteer-run events like this, please consider donating to JGIS, which is a volunteer-run organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, now on to the main event. So I'd like to bring in my JGIS co-host, Dr. Vilma Di Rosario, to introduce our speakers. And by the way, Vilma shares a birthday with Dr. Jane. So happy birthday, Vilma, and over to you.
Happy birthday, Vilma.
Thanks a lot, Carmen, Andy, and everyone.
Happy birthday, Vilma.
Hi. Thanks, Dingwei. Good morning, everyone. And it's a pleasure to see all of you. And it's also wonderful for me to share my birthday with Dr. Jane. As Carmen says, Dr. Jane is 88 today. And to celebrate, we have two dynamic women, Katherine and Karenne, who are going to share with us their passion for the ocean. I will introduce Katherine first, and Katherine will present, and then I'll introduce Karenne after that. So Katherine, we're so happy to have you with us, Katherine, today. Katherine is from the US, but she is based here in Singapore, which is close to all the coral reefs in the area. And she's an underwater photographer. Her specialty is taking photographs up close and personal, and she's going to share those with us. And the goal she has is to inspire people to love our underwater wildlife and to recognize their fragility, the inhabitants themselves and the ecosystems. And she hopes with that, she can inspire us to care more deeply for our marine environments. So over to you, Katherine.
Great, thank you, Wilma. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to talk to the audience. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great, great. So what I'm going to talk about today is diving in Singapore. Oftentimes, many people, including Singaporeans, are shocked when I tell them I dive here. They're like, really? Where is that? I heard the viz is really bad. And it is true, the visibility isn't the greatest. It's not like if you went to Tioman or neighboring Indonesia. However, if you set your expectations right, if you want to improve your diving skills, you want to improve your underwater photography, even if you want to hunt and find critters, it's actually a wonderful and rich marine environment in which you can find macro life. So let me just start with, what I've been diving for 19 years before I started diving Pulau Hantu. This is when I lived in the US as well as elsewhere. So you may wonder, why would an experienced scuba diver choose to dive here at Pulau Hantu? Well, it started in 2015 when I started diving in Singapore. And as you can see from the screen, there's this really cute sea slug. We commonly nicknamed Sean the Sheep. He's about the size of a piece of rice. And when I went to, in 2015 is when I also started underwater photography, and I had just completed a trip to Bali where I was introduced to this sea slug. And I quickly fell in love with his comical and cute face. And then when I came home to Singapore, I started to do some research about the sea slug and where it lives and habitat, etc., and found out that it was present in Singapore. And so I started to ask around the diving communities, like, where can I see the sea slug? And I basically became obsessed in trying to track the sea slug down. So that's how my journey started, was in 2015. And then since then, I've learned that our waters are actually very rich in terms of macro life, marine life, and it's a great place to spend an afternoon as well as improve my photography. So where is Pulau Hantu? If you can see on the map, there's this little tiny red dot here, or red star. It's located about 20 minutes away from the Pasir Panjang shipping terminal. Pulau Hantu literally means ghost island in Malay, and that is where the ancient warriors once dueled to the death. There's some pictures of what Pulau Hantu looks like. So it's actually like there's two sides to it. There's two inlets, so to speak, the larger one and then the smaller one. And we actually dive along this whole area of the island. And it's actually a very beautiful island. It's uninhabited, it has white sandy beaches. It's very serene and picturesque, but across from the channel, it contrasts with this oil refinery on Pulau Bukam. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition, but nonetheless, even when you dive there and you see the oil refinery, it's actually very beautiful at night, all lit up, as you could see. This is a dive boat, one of the dive boats that goes out to Pulau Hantu. This is taken pre-COVID, we're in large groups, but it's a very comfortable boat. It's equipped with all the diving gear you need. Okay, and probably one of the biggest or the most asked question from me is, what's the diving condition like? Because people hear all these horror stories about Pulau Hantu, they can't see anything. And I will just set the record straight. Yeah, the visibility isn't the greatest. It averages anywhere from 2 to 3 meters. It can be as good as 5+ meters, which is still not the best. But if you're looking for small little critters, 2 to 3 meters visibility is absolutely fine and to do photography. Currents can be strong, and it like any other place, it really depends on the mood and the tides. But then what it has going for it is that it's very shallow, so you really can't go too deep, so to speak. The western side, which tends to be our training ground, goes as deep as maybe 11 meters, and then the North Jetty can go as deep as 25. So it's really a shallow diving experience. And the water is warm. It ranges from 23 to 30 degrees Celsius. The best time to actually dive is when it's colder, as that seems to bring in the cold, deep water, as well as the nutrients that then fuel the life above. It isn't for everybody. It is a more challenging type of diving condition due to the visibility, as well as it's a muck site, so it tends to be a very sandy, silty bottom. So this is just a picture of what it looks like underwater. I think this is actually me here in the photo. And so you can see it's very quite barren. It's very silty, but it's actually it looks worse than it is, but it's actually fine when you're actually diving. Oh, one other point I wanted to make was, because it is silty, it has a lot of rocks. This habitat seems to support a lot of marine life, and I will showcase some of that marine life in the next few slides. Okay, before I do that, just touch upon my photography equipment. So I use a variety of cameras. I actually have three different cameras, from a compact point-and-shoot camera to a full-length DSLR. I use magnifiers, they're called diopters, and I also have lighting instruments in order to illuminate as it's dark underwater. And then different ways in which you can set up the camera, depending on what I'm trying to achieve, what kind of composition I want. And we have a lot of underwater photographers at all levels who like to dive Pulau Hantu, so it's not a secret. But again, as I said, it's a great place to improve your diving skills, improve your photography skills, improve your critter hunting skills. So this was probably a couple years back where we had a special dive charter for all the photographers, but every week you usually see several photographers on the boats. Okay, so let's talk about the critters and what you can find at Pulau Hantu. By and large, the sea slugs, or they're also called nudibranches, are probably the most abundant at Pulau Hantu. Again, as I mentioned, this rich, silty bottom and the plant life or coral life that grows there tends to support the sea slugs. There are over 100 plus recorded species in Singapore alone. Worldwide, there's 2,000 to 3,000, but 100 is quite a lot. Many of them are seasonal, and then there's still more to be discovered that we don't even know about. This is one of the celebrity sea slugs that photographers all over the world like to shoot, and it's nicknamed the donut doto. And people would fly to Bali just to photograph this nudibranch. And it wasn't until 2017 that one of the dive photographers actually discovered it for the first time alive in our waters. And then since then, it seems to have become a permanent resident, as now we're able to find it every single year. And depending on the time of year, it could be reproducing, it could be having eggs. One of the dive instructors earlier this year counted 24 of these sea slugs in less than 1 hour. So an incredible population. This is also another kind of doto sea slug, also popular in Bali, in Anilau, other places that people go for dive photography. We have two variations, two morphs of it. One is the pink one. You can see that they're nicknamed kissing dodos because they're often facing each other like this. And we also have the yellow morph, which tends to be a little bit more common in other places. Pink ones I've only seen here in our region. And then Sean the sheep. Again, this is what started my diving career in Pulau Hantu. These cute, adorable faces with these false eyes. We have a couple different species here. One's this very solid dark green. And then we have more of a strawberry, we call it the strawberry Sean the sheep. Very picturesque, very, very tiny. So don't expect to go on a dive and then see it. You know, oftentimes it's very hard to find because they are only the size of a piece of rice. But as you become more experienced and start to learn about their habitat, what kind of food they eat, you start to learn how to find them. So it's not like I found them right away. I had to learn about my subjects in order to take them. And Bornellas, this whole family here are called Bornellas, 3 different species. The middle one is called Bornella anguilla. So don't be surprised if you're photographing it and it swims right at you like an eel or snake, because these nudibranchs actually can swim. And not all of them can swim, but only a few species. Speaking of swimming, one day when we arrived at the jetty, we saw a large, very large thing swimming in the water. It was about the size of my hand. Had no idea what this was at first. We quickly jumped in with the cameras and found out it was a sea hare. It's like also a type of slug, somewhat like a slug, and it was swimming. And so as you can see, this day, the visibility is actually quite clear, so you can even see the jetty pillar in the background. Very elegant how it moves. Okay, moving on. Another very colorful, beautiful nudibranch is called the damjas. These are 2 different species of it. And sometimes, like as I mentioned, they will display interesting behavior. So in this case, they're actually laying an egg ribbon. So you can see this whitish spiral. This is an egg ribbon. And they generally, you'll start to see them. It's, again, like I said, they're seasonal. So you will see them all at once for maybe a period of a couple weeks. They'll be mating. They'll be all over the place, literally. They'll be laying egg ribbons, and then they will all disappear for many, many months, and then maybe come back this following year. Another damja series, another damja species. This one tends to be more nocturnal, is from what we observe. Tends to be, again, also dependent on the season. Like right now, this has been spotted. We call this one sunny because of these bumps on its body, which are like, they're called serrata. They look like fried eggs, so we call them like sunny side up eggs. So that's a nickname we gave to this sea slug, but very beautiful. Also one of the more rarer ones that we encounter. And this sea slug is also is a favorite of photographers. Its nickname is Pikachu, which for obvious reason, because of the coloring. This is a favorite worldwide by photographers. And again, people will fly places and put this on their wish list, but we have this in our backyard also. Now, this sea slug is called the Gymnodorus. So if you are a sea slug yourself or nudibranch and you see this big orange polka dot thing coming at you, you better run. You better crawl as fast as you can, because this slug will eat other slugs. And slug is a misnomer in terms of the term being slow, but they can actually move quite quickly, and it can take down other slug species about its size, and then it will consume it whole in a matter of minutes. So people have actually witnessed this happen last year, this actual species doing that. And like most sea slugs, as I mentioned before, in order to find them, you often need to understand their habitat and their food source, because when you're living in the ocean, there's lots of predators. So one way to survive is through camouflage. And the other way to survive is you want to obviously live by live on your food source. So in this case, on the left-hand side, you'll see these beautiful sun corals. They're open, but there's one in the middle that's a little bit different. This one here, it's a little darker. This is actually the sea slug. So this is how it blends into its own environment. So if you're swimming by, you probably don't even notice it. And this is actually its food source. It eats decaying corals, and that is its role. So, and then here it is crawling on the sand. So you can see what it looks like. And then Genolus. Genolus is a very famous also sea slug. I actually took this this year, a couple months ago. Oh no, not even a month ago. A month ago. So it's on a night dive. Oh yeah, the other thing too is I wanted to mention is like night dives, the critters seem to be more active. Everything seems to come out at night. Possibly it's because of the darkness, and they're able to forage and feed and mate under the cover of darkness. So we tend to notice that more things come out at night than during the daytime. And through my years of diving at Palau Hantu, I've actually discovered a couple new nudibranchs, new to Singapore for the first time. So this is what they call Polycera, not the most beautiful picture, but the first time it was ever sighted, as well as this one. This was a Gires, which was, when I shot this one, I remember I thought, wow, looks like a piece of dirt, but somehow it looks a little bit different. And then when I spoke to the sea slug expert on our boat, she said it was a new record. So quite exciting when you find new things for the first time. The more to be discovered. All right, I'm going to switch gears from slugs to talk about some of the other marine life. Again, like any ocean reef, there is lots of fish, a lot of different photogenic type of fish. Here we have a very common Whipgoby, and it lives on whip corals, these long whip corals. Sometimes they're white, and you can see here, these are the eggs. These are the eggs. You can see all the little eyes. So these are eggs that are probably going to hatch very, very soon. And then we have, again, some less common fish, but sometimes we have the juvenile Sweetlips, and occasionally we'll see the dragnets, which will kind of crawl and hop around the seabed floor. And this one is called nicknamed Tiger Gobi. This was a big find for me this year. I never knew this existed in Singapore. It is a commonly photographed subject in Indonesia and Philippines. Though it is not the same species as those, based on its fin ray structure, from what I understand from the researchers. But nonetheless, it's a very uncommon goby. First time I've seen it, and none of the other photographer friends of mine have ever seen it before. So very picturesque, as you can see, quite small, maybe less than 2 cm in length. So it's a very tiny and skittish type of goby. But never seen it again since I sighted it last year. And the master of camouflage. I'm not sure how many people know what this is, but it looks like a rock. And when it's on the reef or next to corals, it's very easily overlooked. This is a frogfish. And we have black ones, we have yellow ones, we have white ones. I am terrible at spotting them, but there is one guy who wears these bright blue shorts that if you ever see him diving there, he's the master at spotting these elusive creatures. And seahorses. Right underneath our jetty, we actually have a lot of discarded tires and things, but actually they make good reef habitats for our marine life. And so we have a lot of seahorses that are often found in the corals or in the near the sea tires, in the very shallow depths, and they're year-long residents. So they're always a joy to see. Shrimps. We have a variety of interesting shrimps, again, all very photogenic. This is called a sawblade or Tosioma shrimp. Sometimes you will see it in season where it's actually breeding. I think this one has started to develop eggs. Another kind of shrimp, this is not a photo taken by me, but one of my friends, is the tiger shrimp. I have yet to see the tiger shrimp. It is a very photogenic, hot subject for photographers. It's generally only seen during the night dives, but on occasion during the daytime, but so far in all my diving experience, I have not yet seen this tiger shrimp here in Singapore, though I've seen it elsewhere in other countries. Probably the most big surprise find in 2021 is this octopus. Again, I did not see it. This was taken by one of our diving instructors, and it's a very rare octopus to find and very, very tiny, less than, well, I don't know, very small, maybe 3, 4, 5 cm or less in length. Highly venomous, but not one to be afraid of because it will not attack you unless you try to grab it or hold it. But it is a very venomous octopus. And then speaking of octopus, I had an amazing experience last year with this one octopus. So this is kind of like my octopus teacher, Hantu style. On our seabed floor, there's often you find discarded jars, but they also again make habitats for some of the marine life. So in this one jar, there was this octopus that was in there, and she had barricaded herself in with shells, as you can see here. And then on the side of the glass, I noticed there were some eggs that were just laid, and they were at early stage. So during the subsequent weeks after, whenever I went diving, I would go check on this octopus and followed her journey. So this was 7 weeks later. You can see she's still in the jar. These are her eggs here. And then his close-up of the eggs. These eggs were about to hatch. You can see all the little eyes. And so they actually hatched the week later. I wasn't there for the hatching, but then divers who saw her, the eggs were all gone. She was still in her jar, but she was incredibly weak. She was incredibly weak at that point. And she was basically about to die. So in nature, she had delivered her eggs. They had successfully grown up, and her mission in life was accomplished. So that was basically the end of her life cycle. And then sharks. Everyone likes the big stuff, but we do have sharks. Not always the easiest to photograph given the murkiness of the waters, but this was a very cute bamboo shark, size of the palm of my hand. It must have just hatched, or sorry, not hatched, but was given birth, and probably about less than a week old. And then this is a picture of what an adult bamboo shark. Sometimes they're found usually under ledges and crevices in the rocks. And blue spotted rays, they're common in other places, but and sometimes we see them. They're not necessarily that rare, but they make for very picturesque subjects. And then last but not least, it is a big ocean that you're diving in, so you never know what you're going to see. This was taken a couple years ago. We literally saw pink dolphins when we left the port. This is just right outside, and as you can see, with all this stuff in the water, they came very close to shore. So normally we see pink. Sometimes we see pink dolphins, but they're usually near the island. This was a rare opportunity where we actually saw it so close to land. And then last but not least, I'm very proud to have won some awards based on the photos I actually took in Singapore. So winning photos doesn't always mean, shooting the most exotic or trendy subjects. It can be a very ordinary subject, and it's how you capture it. So this was a conch that I took in Palau Hantu. And it was also featured in an international scuba diving magazine. And then some of my more creative photography, again, leveraging the sea slugs. These are patterns. The pattern in the background is actually the sea slug, and I used bubbles to shoot through in order to create this abstract effect. So all of these were taken in Palau Hantu also, and I'm very proud that they've been recognized internationally with awards. And then if you're a diver and you're interested in learning more, you can stay connected with us. We have a Facebook group called SG Underwater Macro Photographers. Here we show photos of any marine life that's taken within Singapore. And it doesn't matter if you're, how you take the photo. It's great to share and share what you see. And that's all. Thank you very much. And I think we will leave questions to the end. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Katherine. And I'll let Vilma introduce our next speakers, please.
Thanks so much, Katherine. I just love your photographs, and I'm sure everyone did too. My favorite story is that wonderful octopus mom in the jar. It's wonderful. Yeah, and I love those sea slugs. Just makes me want to put on my dive suit, which hasn't been used for eons. So, and I'm sure you've inspired all of us to want to know more about our marine biodiversity and go out and see it, even though it's in photographs. So thank you very much, Katherine.
Thank you for having me.
So just as those photographs are so awesome, so are the challenges faced by our marine inhabitants and their habitats. And Karenne here actually works to conserve and manage our coastal areas and our marine environment. So that's just wonderful. I just want to say a few words about Karenne. To me, she's a chili padi. For those who don't know Malay, it's just something that somebody or something that's really small, but so dynamic. And that's Karenne in my view. Dr. Karenne Toon is the Director of Coastal and Marine Environmental Branch at the National Biodiversity Center of National Parks. So her work involves the management and conservation of Singapore's coastal and marine environment and the biodiversity that these environments support. Her teams support interagency committee that studies, provides technical inputs for policy making, and builds capacity in the coastal and marine environments or marine environment sector of our island. And her team also oversees the Sisters Island Marine Park, which is our first marine park. So over to you, Karenne.
Thank you very much, Vilma. And thank you, Andy, Carmen, and all at JGIS for inviting me to share more about Singapore's marine biodiversity. Let me just share my screen now very quickly. And can everyone see my screen? Is it big enough? I guess everyone can see my screen, yeah? So I'll continue. Yeah, so it's really an honor for me to be here today, especially today, like what Carmen mentioned, it's Dr. Jane Goodall's birthday, and she, together with other luminaries like Dr. Sylvia Earle and Sir David Attenborough, have been inspirations to not just me, but so many other conservation-inclined individuals, who, from their experience, listening to their lectures, learning about their life, make us want to focus on the environment. So thank you to Dr. Jane and everyone else who have been an inspiration. So I'll start now since I've got quite a few slides to go through. I'm still going to try to keep it within 20 minutes. But for many of you guys at this session here, you will be familiar with this part of Singapore. Singapore is a very busy urban environment lined by a whole bunch of anthropogenic activities. We have ports, one of the busiest ports in the world, one of the largest oil refineries. We have shipbuilding. In fact, I think for those of you who don't know, for the oil rig industry, Singapore is one of the biggest oil rig manufacturers in the world. At the same time, the waters must also support aquaculture, the food that we eat, derived from some of the food that we eat derived from the sea. Although we don't have a large aquaculture industry, we have a 30 by 30 target, so we're trying to make sure that we can provide for Singapore. And at the same time, we do realize that there is ongoing activities, coastal modifications that all put pressure onto our coastal and marine environment. So this part everyone is familiar with, but I think what many of y'all may not be familiar with, and thanks to Katherine's presentation earlier, a bit more insight on that is, despite this urbanization, Singapore still supports a rich variety of coastal and marine habitats and biodiversity that we support. So this map just shows you where most of our coastal and marine habitats are distributed. So up in the north, you have a lot of the most sheltered environments. So things like mangroves, some of the mudflats are situated up in the north within Sungai Buloh, Mandai mudflats, Pulau Ubin, and a large part of Pulau Tepong is still quite green. Then in the south of Singapore, this is where you're going to get a lot of your coral reefs, coral reef areas, as well as some of the larger seagrass patches that we have within Singapore. And although if you look at this, it doesn't look very much. It looks like little slivers of habitats dotting around Singapore. These little slivers support a large biodiversity, and that's really because of two reasons. We think that these two situations give Singapore the cutting edge in biodiversity. So if you look at this map, what we're showing here is the Coral Triangle. Now, the Coral Triangle is recognized by experts as the Center for Marine Biodiversity. And Singapore, as small as we are, we sit at the edge, the western edge of the Coral Triangle. And if you look at the maps on the right, looking at coral, mangrove, and seagrass distribution, you find that Singapore sits really within the most diverse part of the region for both coral diversity, mangrove diversity, and seagrass diversity. So that's one of the reasons why Singapore, despite our size, has rich marine biodiversity. And the second reason is also because Singapore really sits at the conflux of three regional seas. So with our semi-diurnal tidal cycles, we get water moving in and out of our coastal waters. And these waters come from areas as far as the Indian Ocean, running through the Andaman Sea, South China Sea, and the Java Sea. And as you know, marine waters are always full of plankton, and this plankton are really the larval stages of many animals. So Singapore being where we are, we receive larvae coming in from different parts of the ocean. So these two reasons really give Singapore that advantage in harboring very, very rich biodiversity. And just to give you some examples, these are just some of the posters that was prepared during the comprehensive marine biodiversity surveys, rich diversity of marine life found within the mudflats of Singapore. But beyond that, Singapore also has about 250 species, or we have about 250 species recorded in Singapore since records has started. And that accounts for about a third of the world's hard coral species. And you might think a third, no big deal, but it is a big deal when you realize that although Singapore is small, our coral reefs only occupy 1,000th of 1% of the coral reefs in the world. So 1,000 of 1%, and we have 1/3 of the coral species. So that's actually quite significant for a very small area. Half of the mangrove species occur within Singapore's mangrove habitats, and about 1/5 or 12 of the seagrass species can be found within Singapore waters. So these species are important because they form the keystone of your various habitats. And these habitats support over 500 marine fish species. And I believe there's a research program going on now with some NUS researchers, and this number will probably go up to maybe more than 800. So they are doing the inventory of marine fish species. So we are covering quite a large number of marine fish species, over 200 sponge species, sea anemones, sea stars, and as what Katherine mentioned, several hundred nudibranch species. So this is just a sample of the species that are present within Singapore's waters. And again, Katherine mentioned a donut nudibranch. It was first reported within Singapore waters in 2015. And over the last 10 years, we have over 100 new species records. That basically means species that have been described before, but haven't been found in Singapore waters. We recorded them in Singapore. But more importantly, we also discovered 30 species new to science in the last 10 years. So these are species that haven't been seen at all before, first time being described, and they're described from specimens that were found in Singapore waters. So again, just to sum this up, Singapore is tiny. We have a very, very small and limited land and sea space, but within this limited space, it still harbors very, very rich biodiversity. So what I'll do now is just very quickly take you through this biodiversity, starting from land and going into the sea. For those of you who are interested to find out more and say, where can I see these? So I'll just walk you through this. So next time, when you start to venture out into our coastal and marine areas, you'll be prepared to look out for certain groups of animals that are found within these 4 main areas. So I'll start first with the coastal forest. Now, coastal forests are interesting plants. Unlike the rainforest that we find within Singapore itself, the coastal forests distributed around very small patches in the north within Coney Island, Pulau Ubin, in the south within Labrador Nature Reserve. So one of the most accessible places that you are interested to visit, as well as the southern islands. What makes coastal forests different from the terrestrial forests is the fact that the species found here have to be very tolerant to strong winds. They have to be tolerant to salt spray, so they need to be quite resilient to a highly saline atmosphere. And because of that, you get a certain composition of plants that are found within the coastal forest. And those include things like the pitcher plants. So pitcher plants usually found in nutrient-poor areas. So you find there the Barringtonia, the fish poison tree, the Mentigi, the Pemphis. I think at the moment we only find it in 2 or 3 islands within Singapore. And within this area, it supports quite a large number of coastal birds. Then moving on from the coastal forest, we have the mangrove forest. And if you remember the map I showed you earlier, most of our mangrove forests are distributed up in the north. But in the south, we also have mangroves within Belaya Creek and Pulau Semakau. And Belaya Creek, Sungai Buloh are some of the most accessible mangrove forests. So, take a walk there, especially during low tide, and you'll be amazed at the number of species that you can find within mangrove forest. Now, one of the things about mangrove forest that is really important is the fact that it is a fantastic sequester of carbon. Now, we talk about climate change and what can we do to halt climate change, and people around the world are looking at habitats that help to absorb carbon from the environment. But absorbing is one thing, storing it is another. So mangrove forests can absorb quite a lot of carbon, and so can terrestrial forests. But the difference is mangrove forests actually store about 3 times more carbon than the terrestrial forest. And that's really because of the mud. The mud in the mangrove is a great place for nutrients to be stored. And one of the reasons really is because mud is tiny, and because it's made up of small particles, it traps a lot of the water, making it anoxic. So things that organic matter that get trapped within the mud stay in the mud for a very, very long time. So very important ecosystem. And mudflats are mangrove also support mudflats that are important for migratory birds. So these are just some of the examples of the biodiversity you see. On Facebook recently, there were quite a few photos of beautiful photos of crocodiles within Sungai Buloh. So if you want to see crocodiles in a safe environment, head off to Sungai Buloh Nature Reserve, as well as a whole variety of other biodiversity you find within the mangrove forest. Then moving closer towards the sea, you have the beach environment, mainly along Changi, East Coast, and the southern islands. Rather bare area, you won't find as much biodiversity within this area, mainly because the sand is very porous. It doesn't have much nutrients within the sand, and it's mainly dominated by scavengers like your host crabs, your monitor lizards. But one important thing about our beach is the fact that it is critical for the Foxbill Sea Turtle to come into nest. And just a nice little video. While I'm talking, you can see. So this video is taken of the Foxbill hatchlings from Singapore that were released back into the sea. And you find that Singapore is, interestingly, one of the areas where we have quite a high number of Foxbill nestings. In fact, we have not recorded green turtle nesting in Singapore. All our nestings have been Foxbill turtle. It's a critically endangered species. And in many parts of the world, for every 9 green turtles that nest, you get 1 hawksbill nesting. So our beaches are really important as a nesting ground for hawksbill turtles. Getting closer to the sea now. So now we're moving towards the rocky shore, and you'll find these at Pulau Ubin, Labrador Nature Reserve, and many of the southern islands. The intertidal area is a very, very challenging area for animals to be in. At high tide, it's covered in water. At low tide, it's exposed to the air. If it's low tide during daylight hours, they get exposed to sun, hot sun, high temperatures. So animals living within this zone, the intertidal zone, need to be adapted to survive in these areas. So within the rocky intertidal shore, you'll find many of these animals actually found within crevices, below rocks. But of course, we don't encourage you to start moving around rocks, take a look at them. You might see some of them, like say the jewel chiton or the Oncidium slug, very well camouflaged, crawling along some of the damper surfaces of rock. So take a look out for them if you are walking along the shores. Or some of the snails that have an armor around them because they have a shell that protects them. You can see them crawling mainly along the waterline. So they are above the waterline, but quite close. So if you're along the rocky shore, look close to the waterline. That's where you'll see a lot of the animals that you may not see otherwise. Now we move a bit more towards areas that are more sheltered. So the mudflats, for example, you'll find a lot of them up in the north where there is low wave energy. Mud, basically because they're very fine, they get washed away very easily. They need an environment that has low energy. So you'll find mudflats in areas like Sungai Buloh, Chek Jawa. And in the south, you might find some areas that have muddy intertidal like Pulau Semakau, but most of the mudflats are located up in the north. You might be able to visit some of them. For example, we've heard, I'm sure some of you have heard a lot about the Changi intertidal trips that many people are going, hundreds of people during low tide. It has caused some impact to the environment. So we're out there reaching out to them to say that it's great to go, it's great to enjoy. Don't pick up, don't touch, especially if you don't know the animal, because some of them can be quite dangerous if you're not familiar with the biology. But if you go to Changi, you will see a lot of the animals that's found within some of the mudflats. So for example, you'll find mangrove horseshoe crabs. In mudflats, you will see, sometimes you see the fiddler crabs. Katherine mentioned Pulau Hantu. Pulau Hantu at low tide has a large population of the fiddler crabs and mudskippers. Some areas that are exposed to more wave energy tend not to have so much mud. You'll have instead sand, because sand can withstand the energy. They don't get washed off as easily. So some areas of Chek Jawa, East Coast, and the Southern Islands, you'll have sandy intertidal flats. These areas are also important. You'll find quite a lot of animals that are burrowed within the sand. For example, some of the sand dollars, you'll get sea cucumbers, snails found within the sandy intertidal areas. And you'll see a lot of birds, within the mudflats or sand flats feeding during low tide. So very nice opportunity to look at bird behavior. If you're interested, go and look at how they feed. Look at the bills of the birds, and you see birds with different bills will feed, will forage in different areas depending on the characteristic of the sand. So a nice little field trip on bird behavior if you go during low tide to some of these areas. Seagrass areas are also found within the intertidal zone, and we have about 12 species of seagrass. Seagrass incredibly important ecologically because many seagrass are actually the nursery grounds for young fish and a lot of other animals. And these are just some of the photos of the lush seagrass meadows that we find. The tape seagrass in this photo here, I think, is within Pulau Semakau, is one of the strongholds of the tape seagrass. But Chek Jawa, you've got seagrass along Changi and within Saiwi Reef and Labrador. So these are areas that you can go and take a look at the seagrass. But just to take note, not all areas are accessible to people. For example, if you want to look at the seagrass at Labrador, you'll have to look out from the viewing area. You can't go into the seagrass. But if you really want to get your hands wet a bit, get your feet wet a bit, go down during low tide at Changi. Just be careful when you're there, behave responsibly within the area. You'll see tons of biodiversity. So just some examples of the animals that you find within seagrass meadows. You can go almost every low tide, every month, and you'll see different things. You never get bored when you go to a seagrass areas. Because like what Katherine mentioned, a lot of animals are seasonal. You go at different times of the year, you will see different animals within the seagrass area. So really lovely excursion with your family, especially if you have kids, bring them out. It's a good living classroom that you can bring them to. Then one interesting thing about our seagrass is dugongs feed within our seagrass areas. Now, you ask, have you seen a dugong? I've not seen a dugong within our waters, but what we do see are what you call the dugong feeding trails, which are these little tracks that you see. So when dugongs feed, they literally graze along these seagrass, leaving these trails. Some of you might ask, just because you see these trails, does it actually mean that they're dugong in our waters? How can you prove it? This could be created by another animal or by wave action. 3 years ago, we had a research project with some academics from NUS, and they use this new technique called environmental DNA. And I think Andy has used it, looking at monkey poop, right, if I'm not wrong. But using the same method, they took sand samples along these dugong feeding trails, and they found dugong DNA. So basically, some of the tissue from the dugong snout probably sloshed off and got stuck within the sand, and we could actually confirm that dugong was present within this area and was feeding along these trails. Then, as you get closer even to the sea, you start seeing corals. So within the intertidal area, towards the edge of the intertidal area in the southern islands, you'll start seeing coral rubble reef. And although looking at it, it looks like just this messy area of brown rock, it's actually quite rich with marine life. Within this area, you'll see things like your reef octopus, you'll see things like your fluted giant clam. Oftentimes, you'll see fish and rays found within the small tidal pools. And you'll also see nudibranchs that are found within the intertidal area. In fact, Shaun the sheep can be found within some of the algae that they live on within the intertidal area. And I think some of our volunteers have gone out, have seen Shaun the sheep, within, I think, if I'm not wrong, the Sisters Island Marine Park within the low tide intertidal area, Shaun the sheep. And I saw one photo with, I think, 10 individuals of Shaun the sheep on one little algal face. So quite an amazing place to visit some of these intertidal coral rubbly area. And now we move to the reef, and I'll just quickly go through this because Katherine has shared quite a bit of photographs. Singapore's coral reefs, unlike other clear water areas, do not grow very deep. So if you are a diver and you visit our coral reefs, you'll find corals within the upper, perhaps 5 meters, at most 8 meters of coral reef. Beyond that, there's insufficient light that reaches down to the corals, because corals need light to survive. They are animals, but they have an algae living inside them that photosynthesizes. And the algae is known to give the corals between 80–90% of the energy needs. So it's very important to have sufficient light for corals to survive. So we don't find them very deep. We find them in the shallow waters, but where we find them is incredibly rich. So these are just some of the animals that you see within our subtidal coral reef areas. And now we move to the open sea. It's the largest habitat within our waters and incredibly important. You may not see very much, even just looking in, you just see water, but water is an incredible connector. Most of the marine animals reproduce by releasing sperm or egg or larvae into the water, which basically means water transports them around. So without the marine habitat, without the open sea, you will not get that kind of connectivity. You will not bring animals from one place to the other. So in Singapore, our open sea area is really important because some of the research has shown that Singapore waters tend to be self-seeding. So a lot of the biodiversity within our water stay within our water. Once in a while, we get this introductions from other seas. So, like I mentioned in the first few slides, there's a conflux of 3 regional seas that brings in a lot of larvae. So we get the introduction at these points. But within Singapore itself, the water connects all our coastal and marine areas. And this is how we continue to maintain the rich biodiversity. Just some examples of what you will see, including the dolphins that Katherine mentioned earlier. Then lastly, a habitat that unfortunately we know very little of, and this is an area we're going to start focusing a bit more on in the coming years. It's again found all over Singapore, and it's a rich habitat full of biodiversity. We know some aspects of it, but a lot of it still remains unknown. So these are just some of the animals that we've seen within the deeper seafloors of Singapore. So from here, I will move on to management. So I'll just spend the next few minutes talking about how, what we do within Singapore to help manage our coastal and marine environment. And I want to start with this, managing natural resources is actually quite complex. At the end of the day, of course, the goal really is to safeguard the ecosystems and the biodiversity that we support. But to do so, we must really have a good understanding of the socioeconomic drivers that influence some of the decisions that are made. And I just want to bring this because I remember ages ago when I was attending this lecture, I think it was, if I'm not wrong, somewhere in the US, the person presenting mentioned that conservation is really a privilege for the rich and a privilege for developed states. And that's basically because, it kind of follows Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In many countries, conservation is not given the kind of priority that it should be given. That's because people are still within the lower rungs of the hierarchy. You're looking at your psychological needs, your safety, love and belonging. Without meeting these, you can't move on to the higher level, and conservation kind of falls within that. Once you reach your basic needs, you look for things that give you more meaning. And this is where basically Singapore can come in, because we are quite a developed nation. People are quite doing quite well compared to many other places. We can focus a bit more on conservation because really, like the quotation says, we can't be the environmental action takers that we may want to be if we are worried about meeting our basic needs. And unfortunately, in many parts of the world, including Southeast Asia, that is one of the main reasons that prevents conservation from taking root in many communities. So in Singapore, what do? We are guided by what we call the Nature Conservation Master Plan. And I'll quickly go through this. There are 4 thrusts under the Nature Conservation Master Plan: conservation of key habitats, habitat enhancement, restoration, species recovery. The 3rd thrust is applied research in conservation biology and planning. And the 4th one, and to me is really one of the most important trusts, that's community stewardship and outreach in nature. And how we do this is through what we call a toolbox approach. We look at management through proactive planning, looking forward, doing periodic reviews, optimizing land use, and importantly, preparing for uncertainty. Singapore is a very small country, so we have a very flat government. So in many instances, we can adopt what we call a whole of government approach when we tackle problems, including conservation. Partnerships are really important, especially partnerships with academic institutions, NGOs, private sectors, as well as the community, and science-based management. We've got to make sure that whatever decision that we make is grounded in science, and it is something that we can defend from literature, from some of the research that we're doing. So this is generally the conservation toolbox approach that we take in managing our coastal and marine areas. And the last few slides, we just go through it. So for conservation of key habitats, it's really protecting areas like the Sisters Island Marine Park, Labrador Nature Reserve, Sungai Buloh, a few new ones that have come online in the last 2 years, Mandai Mudflats, Kati Bongsu, and just to assure everyone, it is not something that stops after we have a few. Those who are involved will always be looking at which other areas can we work towards. It's a long process. Again, whole of government, it requires a lot of input, a lot of feedback, meeting a lot of needs. So sometimes safeguarding areas could take a lot longer than you might want or hope for, but it is happening in the background. We focus a lot on habitat enhancement, species recovery. We see the Neptune scalp sponge, a species that was thought to have disappeared from the world, extinct for the last 100 years. We found it in Singapore in 2011, and since then, there are over 10 individuals that we know exist within Singapore waters. We do restoration within mangrove areas, and so also work on specific species like turtles. Research, the foundation of some of the management decisions that we make. So we work very closely with academics and other partners. And lastly, outreach. Without the community, we cannot get conservation going. Conservation in Singapore really thrives on the backbone of the community that's supported. So we work very closely with various community partners. JGIS is one of them, when it comes to terrestrial environment. Wilma is very familiar with a lot of the other conservation-related outreach that NParks and other groups have. So this is where, I guess, in my last slide, if you're interested, what can you do? How do you get involved? Then there are actually many opportunities. Start off with going out to visit our shores. And if you do, be responsible, use the boardwalks, don't pick up things, especially if you don't know what they are. And if you do, if you know what they are and you pick it up, put it back. As far as possible, don't take anything away from the shore. If you want to get a bit more involved, then volunteer with NParks or with other groups. We have programs that look at, we go around along the beaches during turtle nesting season to look for turtles, for example. There are many other watch programs, Karenne Watch, I think we have Butterfly Watch, Dragonfly Watch. And these are all citizen science programs that people can get involved in. But really, if you don't have the time to do that, then just be a conscious citizen, don't litter. Instead, if you visit some of our intertidal areas, go with a tong, a plastic bag. I see people doing that, and it's really amazing, very heartwarming to see families going out there on their own, picking up trash. So you could do that. And if you're a fisher, if you do take from the environment for sustenance, then do it responsibly. If you catch 10 fish and you only need 2, you can release the rest of the plate. So these are some of the messaging that we're trying to get out to people to ensure that Singapore can maintain our marine biodiversity. And that's my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. And I want to thank Katherine as well. So let me go ahead. Katherine, if you turn on your camera, I'm going to put a spotlight on you so we can start the Q&A. And let me add Vilma here as well. Okay, yeah, like I said, thank you very much. That was fascinating. I mean, when we think about marine biodiversity in this region, we automatically think about the coral triangle. And who knew that we have such beautiful creatures living right at our doorstep? And, I think I might have to rethink diving at Pulau Hantu. I have yet to do it, but maybe I'll need to follow Katherine out, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and start our Q&A. Vilma, could you ask the first one for us, please?
Yes, I will. Thanks again, both of you, Katherine and Karen, for the wonderful talks. This question is actually for both. Do you get burnt out from conservation efforts? Both of you are deeply, diving and deeply in conservation. So, do you feel burnt out? And if you do, how do you manage that? Maybe we can start with Katherine and then Karen.
I guess to answer that, I don't really get burnt out from conservation because that's the whole reason why I do it is if I just take pictures and they don't do anything, then what am I doing that for? So for me, if they make any difference, if they just bring awareness that we have this, biodiversity, if it gets people curious to want to go out and learn more, I think it's accomplished something. So I don't really get burnt out on the conservation angle. I do sometimes get burnt out on the diving for sure, because so I have, I go through phases like anybody. Sometimes life gets busy, and so you balance things in terms of how much time you actually put into the diving. But yeah, so far I have not been burnt out. As long as it makes a difference, I will continue to do it.
Thanks, Katherine. What about Karen?
Yeah, this is a question I get quite often, and I'll just share something because I really think this is important for me. I don't know whether you can see this. There's this Japanese concept of ikigai, which is a reason for being. And to reach that state, if you can meet some of these, then you have that. And I feel really privileged because I think I am that state because I love what I do. It is something that I think the world needs, or at least the environment needs. I am pretty okay at doing it, and I get paid to do it, right? You couldn't get better than having all these four. So for me, I think burnout is something that I think is a privilege of the work that I do. If I'm not burnt out, I don't think I'm doing enough. So I don't mind it. Sometimes I do. I won't say complain, I talk about it, but I do it really more as a badge of honor, because I think if you're burning out, it means you are going out there doing things that mean something for the environment that you are focused on. So that's basically my, thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for that concept. Over to Carmen for another question.
Thanks, Vilma. I am going to then, we have a few questions for, I think they're mostly for Katherine, because they're about photography. How often do you go out to take photos? And also, what do you love most about underwater photography, and what are some of the challenges that you face?
Okay, so I would say when I started my journey in 2015, at least in Hantu, I was a new photographer. I didn't really know anything, so I self-taught. I spent a lot of time in the field, in the water, so to speak, and literally was going out, I would say every week, every single week for the first couple years. If it wasn't locally, I would be diving overseas. And but what got me, I guess, going in the beginning was the learning phase. I was learning. It was kind of a steep learning curve in terms of how to use my camera equipment, learning how to do compositions. I was already an accomplished diver, so I didn't have to learn from that front. But then also the other big learning curve was how to find the creatures, because I couldn't spot anything in the beginning either. But you learn, and then the more you learn, I think the more excited you get, because you start learning about the habitats. You get excited when you find it by yourself the first time, and then you have this camaraderie too on the boat where other people talk about what they saw, and then you want to see it, so you get so excited about, I want to go see it next weekend. And so I think that was probably, how, in terms of the challenges, but then they were easily solved too by having Palau Hantu in our backyard. So that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, we're lucky, that, like I said, that there is actually so much marine biodiversity right at our doorstep. So Vilma, could you ask the next question?
Yes, this question is for Karen. How are the 10-meter tall structures at Sisters Islands contributing to coral growth? Can you tell us more, please?
Sure. So I think this is I think in one of the slides you saw that huge structure being lowered, the artificial reefs that were placed within the Small Sisters Island in November 2018. The first few years, things that were growing there were mainly the barnacles and some of the early colonizers. But 3 years in, a lot of these initial colonizers have flaked off, and now we've got quite a large diversity of corals that have recruited on them. So that's fantastic. And we have a research project now with an NUS research collaborators to look at succession on these structures. So it has served its purpose as a place where you can attract biodiversity to naturally colonize. We're doing some experiments to move corals there to see which depth do they survive the best. At the same time, they're also serving as really good fish aggregators, but we try not to publicize that too much now, because we don't want people going into our marine park at night to sneak in and try to take the fish out of the marine park. So we're still working on the enforcement part of that. But really, these artificial reefs have proven to be quite incredible little structures, small in scale, but providing a good substrate for biodiversity to take root on.
Thank you. Thanks. Carmen, the next question.
Yeah, so I think we can, this question is for both of you, and I think we can follow up on, what Karen said about, not wanting to publicize certain things too much, because it's about human behavior. We all want to, it's interesting, and we all want to get a good look, touch it, feel it, experience it. But we have a few questions about, I think, Karen, you already addressed it a little bit, that in recent months, we see a lot of report about people going out to the intertidal areas and basically behaving not very responsibly, taking poaching or hunting or disturbing wildlife. And what can be done? I mean, what are the plans to prevent this? And there's, in fact, one question that says, can we make the coastline off limits, and which I don't think that, that may not be the solution. So that's for Karen. And also we have another question for Katherine, asking, do you see unethical photography behavior underwater, or diving behavior? And when you do, what do you do? So maybe we go to Karen first.
Sure. That's a good question. I think Timothy and Tanya asked that in the chat also. It is a challenge. I mean, this is, I think it's a consequence of COVID, when people couldn't get out of Singapore. And then there was some online blogs about going to the intertidal areas. And suddenly, I think it started last June, we had hundreds of people going there. Usually people who visit the intertidal areas go there because they're just interested to look at the biodiversity. But we found some worrying trends starting last year where people were really collecting taking home animals that would die because they cannot keep them alive within, you know, the freshwater environment. And they were not doing it because they wanted to destroy, but it's just this misunderstanding of what these animals are and what they're supposed to be doing when they go out. So started from last year, we actually started this engagement. We had our ambassadors, you know, intertidal ambassadors, which are mainly volunteers. They go out every low tide to engage the public. We try, I think the first step is always outreach and education. If people are not aware of what they're doing, if you can reach out to them and they accept that maybe I could do something better, then I think that's better, because then that message gets transmitted down through the generations. And at least the good news from the volunteers that have gone out is 9 out of 10 are like that. You know, they will say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that I shouldn't be taking, and they put it back. You will have your recalcitrant few who would refuse to listen, refuse to put back. And we're trying to address that. We're trying to find other ways to address it. As you know, we have the Wildlife Act, but the Wildlife Act doesn't include intertidal animals. So we are working with various stakeholders, academia, interest groups, NGOs to find a balance in managing this. We don't want to stop people from going to the environment. I think it's important for people to engage. It's only when you are there to touch and feel, like what Katherine says, right? I mean, if you're not there doing it, you will not appreciate it as much. So we want people to appreciate it, but we want them to do it in a responsible way. So as a challenge, I think we are making some progress in that. And if you're interested, you know, drop me an email. We've got volunteer programs for people who really want to help out in this messaging to the public. So that will be something that will be ongoing for the rest of this year. Thank you. Thank
you, Karen. Katherine?
Okay, so the question was regarding unethical behavior underwater. So yes, this is a hot topic. It's in general in photography, both wildlife photography, underwater photography. There's always ethics involved, and in the underwater world, I would say in Singapore, it's not quite as bad as in some of the more popular photography destinations. It's fueled a lot by social media. It's also fueled by competitions. So when people see what you know, the winning shot, they want to replicate something like that. And essentially they will go out at all costs in order to get that picture, get that photo that no one else has. And that oftentimes that would lead to unethical behaviors. And I think it starts with a lot of education. You have to educate not only the photographer that it's not worth, you know, harming or killing the animal to get that shot, but it's also educating the guides. So if I see behaviors by guides that I hire overseas that do that, try to stage an animal, I will tell them, please do not, you know, I will tell them, do not, if it's not in a good position, then we'll go find another one. It's not worth harming that animal. So a lot of education needs to take place. And then from a competition standpoint, I know the organizers, the judges have become much more stringent in terms of if they suspect any sort of manipulation, and you can view it from the photo because you know that slug or that animal doesn't live or behave in that way. And therefore, you know that photo was manipulated, it will be disqualified immediately. So there is good ongoing dialogue and discussion, but unfortunately, it's with social media. I think it's difficult to control that, and you just have to sort of address it on multiple levels, from the photographer to the actual guides and education.
Indeed, yeah. So it falls on every one of us to be, I guess, you know, championing for wildlife, you know, and when you see something, say something. I guess that's the saying. Yeah. Vilma, I'll let you ask the next question.
Yes. So this is for both of you. Someone is asking a question on plastic waste, and we're wondering, you know, what do each of you think you can do, or in your line of work, as you know, help conserve our marine inhabitants? How, you know, what are the best ways in which we can handle this plastic waste situation? Maybe we can
start. You want to go first?
Anyone, yeah.
Well, I'll just say this is a topic that is it's top of mind for me. I am a, it's funny, I used to work in the plastics industry many years ago, but it has brought great convenience in our lives, but now obviously has a huge environmental impact. So I believe it's not enough. I mean, clearly, beach cleanups are great, but we cannot clean up all the waste that's in the ocean. It's impossible. Even if everyone picked up trash every single day, which we still should pick up trash, it won't stop the problem. In order to stop the problem, we have to stop the demand. So we as consumers need to refuse packaging. We need to, even starting with the grocery store, bring your own bag to the grocery store. And recycling isn't the answer either. It has to be about educating and stopping that demand in order for us to be able to have these other efforts even make a dent. But I think there is no easy solution to that problem. But yeah, that's the only thing I can tell people is just reduction in your use of materials is the best way in which we can stop the plastic problem.
Thanks, Katherine. What about Karenne?
I completely agree with what Katherine says. It is at the end of the day, if you think about the problem, the global problem, it's like thinking about where does the universe end, right? It's such a big problem. It's so hard to even get your mind around how you're going to solve it, because a lot of, like she says, plastic is a very useful product, and in many countries, it is the thing that most people will need, using disposable products. I remember a documentary that showed, say, in some parts of the Philippines, when they can't afford a lot of things, they will go and buy your sachets, and that's what they use, and it's going to be generated, and a lot of it really comes down to equity around the world. So besides tackling the source, besides tackling our own behavior, for it to really change, I think it requires so much more than just doing these few things that we are trying to do now. So it's a very big problem, but although it might not be that easy to solve it, like what Katherine says, we've got to do what we can locally. So make wise decisions, don't add on more to the environment that's already there. It's a big problem. We may not be able to clean it all up, but if we don't start adding more to the environment, as small as our role might be, I think that's a good start, So it is a challenging problem. I've been involved in a couple of research projects looking at marine debris in general. Where are they? How are they brought in? And just a very quick nugget of information for those who are interested. Cleaning up Singapore's beaches. If you want to clean up a beach in Singapore, you go to East Coast around November to February, you get tons of trash. If you want to, but if you go middle of the year, you don't get as much, right? But if you want to clean up the beach middle of the year, go to the northern coast. That's where they are, and that's basically because the research showed that a lot of trash is monsoonal driven. We get a lot of trash coming in daily from the sea, and this trash could be trash that has been floating in the water for the last days, months, or years, and then finally they show up along our shores. So it is a problem that will continue. Don't be discouraged. If you go out, just pick up the trash, because next day there will be trash coming in again. But eventually, if we all start doing that consciously, hopefully we can address that problem. May not be in our generation, but who knows.
Thanks very much, Katherine. Comment?
Yeah, okay. I'm mindful of our time. We have a few minutes left. There are a lot of good questions, but I think we're going to have to ask the last one, and I'll let Vilma ask our customary final question.
Yeah, this is for both Karenne and Katherine. If you have a wish, and your wish comes true, say tomorrow, you go to bed tonight and you make that wish, and the wish comes true tomorrow, what would be your wish that came true for our marine and coastal ecosystems and all the inhabitants that they support? Anybody can go first. Maybe we have Katherine and then Karenne.
I guess if it were one wish, I wish we can conserve the habitat. So this is both on land and underwater. If we don't preserve the habitat and we keep taking away destroying the habitat, like rainforests, or whatever forest we have here, or we continue to reclaim land, our conservation efforts, you know, what are we going to do? Like keep raising animals in the zoo, and is that our conservation plan? Because we've destroyed all of the forests, you know. So to me, is we have to stop consuming our natural habitat for our own personal uses.
Thanks, Katherine. Karenne?
I guess if I had to just drill down to one, right, you know, I think my wish would be starting from school, starting from primary school, there will be a lot more knowledge, education on the environment, and a lot more activities that bring people out. If you started from young, and if you are given the right direction, and if you love the environment, then you will do something. I mean, laws and regulations can come in, but again, they're hard solutions. I think the solution really comes from the people. If enough people love the environment, they will do something for it. And that's why we have people like this, right? If there's enough of us wanting to do something, things can get done. You can change policy, you can change, you know, government, you can do so many things if there are enough people with the right spirit. And for us to get there, we need to be able to reach out to and make sure that that knowledge is transmitted to the next generation. So I hope that there will be greater emphasis on nature, nature appreciation in our school curriculum.
Thank you, Karenne. I think over to you, Carmen.
Yes, well said. Thank you, both of you. And I hope your wishes come true. These are our wishes as well. And so really thank you both, Katherine and Karenne, for spending time with us today and sharing your knowledge. And I also want to thank our wonderful audience today. So as always, our final request is for everybody to turn on your camera if you want to participate, and we want to take a Wi-Fi with everyone. So I'm going to remove the spotlight for everyone, and Andy is actually going to help us take this Wi-Fi. So if you want to participate, turn on your camera and everybody say, happy birthday, Dr. Jane. Whenever you're ready, Andy.
It's Vilma.
Happy birthday, Dr. Jane.
Happy birthday, Vilma.
Happy birthday, Dr. Jane.
Okay, one more time.
Happy birthday, Vilma. Happy birthday, Dr. Jane.
Happy
Smile.
birthday.
Birthday.
Thank you. It's done.
Thank you. Thanks, Karenne and Katherine.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you at our next lecture.